Hello, and welcome back to Sitter's Baked Goods. I know I've been gone for quite a while, but that was because of Christmas baking and moving into this new house. As you can see, I got this nice small little work area, and I can finally talk to you guys face to face. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make your own recipes. I'm going to use a very simple recipe of peanut butter cookies to give you the basics, but you can use this for any recipe. The more ingredients in your recipe, the harder it is to create your own recipe. Because the more that you can change, the harder it is. That's why with a peanut butter cookie, which is just sugar, peanut butter, vanilla, and egg, and a little bit of salt, it's very easy to make your own recipe because I can only change these amount of ingredients. Also, I can change what type I get, but we'll get into that later. First, when deciding how you're going to do your recipe, you need to have a strong base, which means you got to use someone else's recipe. Unless you know every single basics, this is the easiest way to get your own recipes. You can get your recipes from books or from online. It doesn't really matter. As long as you have a strong base that you can look through to find what you need to make. So when I make my recipes, I prefer everything to be in weight. If you prefer to just have them in volume, that's fine for you, but find whatever measurement you feel comfortable using and use that. So this recipe that I found is in volume. So I need to figure out what it's like in grams so that next time I don't have to use my volume scales, I can just go directly to the scale, making things a lot faster. Especially since this volume scale I'm using right now, I have to level it out, scrape it out, and then that's extra steps that you don't really need to do. So, and the beauty about this is you can use any measurement. So for example, this measurement I'm using is a half a cup, but the recipe asks for a full cup. Well, half a cup's 125 grams, so a full cup of peanut butter is 250. Obviously make sure that your hands are clean. Don't be working with dirty hands. Now, while I'm making it, I'm thinking, how can I change it and why I would change it? So, one quick thing I could change is using chunky peanut butter. Why would I want to do that? Different texture, different flavors come out, etc. So as you're working, make sure you figure out what you want as a final product. Now we're going to continue with the sugar. Again, I know what half a cup of sugar weighs, but I'm going to show you so that it's easier for you to understand. That is not a full cup, or sorry, half cup. You need to make sure that it's full to the brim and leveled off, or you're gonna get a uneven product. It's okay if you spill a tiny bit like that, because that doesn't weigh anything. It's only a problem if you're putting in a lot. So nice leveled off. Half a cup sugar, 120. Yep, just like all my other recipes. So, 120 times 2, 240. So when making your own recipe and dealing with sugar, because that's normally a big problem with a lot of people, is you don't want it to be too sweet and you want to be healthy and all these other factors, but you got to remember what sugar does. And if you don't know what sugar does, then you can't play with it. Now, sugar likes to make it chewier, makes it level, like flatten out more. So depending on what you want for your cookie, decide how much you need. But always remember, if it's in the recipe, there's a reason for it to be in the recipe. Make sure you clean as you go. I spilt a little bit of sugar. Don't let that stay there the whole time. You don't want to make your kitchen dirty for no reason. Okay. Nice little egg. We need to first start mixing it together. Now, eggs are a little bit different for weight. As long as you know what eggs you're buying, you should know the weight of each egg. So if you're buying large eggs, it should be anywhere between 50 to 55 grams per egg. So if your recipe asks for just an egg, that's fine. But for example, I'm gonna change this recipe not only as the amounts of ingredients, but the volume. So I might change how much peanut butter I use in the future or sugar in the future, but for sure I'm going to scale up the recipe. And yeah, it's still the exact same recipe as the one you found online or in your cookbook, but you've changed it to what you need for your business or for your family if you're baking at home. If I'm baking at home and I only have one child or I'm just by myself, I don't need to make 100 cookies. But if I am working in a bakery or owning a bakery, it's a lot more needed to have that higher scale. So before we put this egg in, we're gonna whisk it up a bit. I like to add my own vanilla right around this time. The recipe asks for a teaspoon. I know how to do this by weight. You do it by your little teaspoon measuring cup. I know how much it is. Until you know how to do that yourself, I recommend using the scale or your teaspoon measuring spoon. Make sure you get it all. There we go. Now, normally what I would do is have that egg just cracked into here, but so that you can see every step I added that bowl. You don't have to put it in a separate bowl, but it's always recommended because if the egg has gone bad, you don't have to make the whole thing bad, especially when you're making large batches. If the first 11 eggs were good and the 12th one's bad, that whole batch is bad and that's no good anymore. A little bit of salt, and then we're gonna mix again. As I'm making this, I'm thinking, what pairs good with peanut butter? Obvious one comes to mind is chocolate. So maybe I add chocolate chips, or maybe I add a chocolate drizzle over top of it after it's done baking. But all things to consider while you're making your own recipe. Now always remember to clean as you go. If you're in a home setting or have not that much space, like I have a tiny sink, if you keep letting things pile up, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So always clean as you go. Now this peanut butter cookies is obviously flourless. By the way, this is the fork I'm going to use to make the design on the end. That's the other thing you can start to think about is, yes, I might not be able to change anything in this recipe because
it's the best peanut butter recipe you've ever tasted, or for whatever reason, let's say you don't know how to change it or anything like that, you can at least change how you present it. Always be thinking what you can change to make this yours. Now, because this isn't flour in here, like I was about to say, you can mix this as much as you want. Just keep going at her. Nothing's gonna change on this peanut butter cookie. So like, I can keep going for days on end. Nothing will change. So keep that in mind when you're working with gluten-free options, is they don't have the problems of gluten, which is over mixing, stuff like that. Oh, make sure you get everything. The more waste, the less profits. The more waste in here, the dirtier your sink. You don't want your sink to go belly up because you put too much food products in it. Now we're gonna put this in the fridge and let it cool down before we roll it out into balls and then put our design on, okay? Perfect. As we wait for our cookies to cool, we can start preheating our oven. I don't like to preheat my oven until just before time, so I don't waste any power. Okay, now that it's cooled down, we can start making it into balls. I like to use any tool rather than rolling it out. Anything at all. A spoon, preferably something that can get the same shape every time. So, I'll use my ice cream scoop. The reason why I like to do it this way is you get the same product every time. And you can always, again, because there's no flour in here, like I can pack it, I can squeeze it, I can do whatever I want to this and it will never change. Obviously, if you do it for like days on end, it's going to go bad, but that's because of the days, not because of how much you mixed it. Remember, there is some in here at the very end to make sure you get that so you don't have any waste. Now I ended up with this much, which isn't a full one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that means this recipe is going to give me 9. I just slowly add a tiny bit from each one. I get all of this out. Now I can either roll it like a ball so I can get whatever desired thickness I want, or I can just leave them as is and just do this. I'm going to roll them all into balls though. This way I can make them as thick or as thin as I want. And I also can test that as well while I do this. Because again, we're making our own recipe. I want to make sure that I know what I want for the future. Which means the bake time might be different for each one. That just means we have to watch it as we go. Now I have 9 cookies. These are very big, obviously, which is perfect for business, maybe not so much for home baking, but I've never met a child that doesn't want, or an adult for that matter, that does not want a lot of cookies. So you don't have to worry too much about the size. So we'll do 3 at this thickness. Now, with the fork, to make it look nice, you're gonna have to make sure that these are in the previous hole so you're not just flattening it into purely flat. And you can always fix anything after the fact. Again, remember, these don't get any worse the more you mix with them. So if you really are going for perfection, because you're making it for a party or something, if you mess up, you can re-roll them. It's not a big deal. Now let's go with the thinner one. See, I messed up there. We can redo it. No problem. Now just be careful. It is slightly thinner than this one. I don't think I'll go much thinner than that for my recipe. But just be careful when you're doing this, because as you can see, these very delicate. I can mess up. Now because every time I'm pressing with this fork, you can see it's making it longer one way and not the other way. I'm gonna try doing to get this design and not to make it easier for me. For example, like with all of these, I had to form it back into a ball, but with this, I think this looks nicer, and I don't have to do any extra steps to make it work perfectly. So we're going to try this. We're going to see if the thicker ones are better than the thinner ones, and we'll see how the design works. Now this one's thinner than the rest, because I want to see if this design changes, okay? Then at the end, we can decide how we're going to change the recipe. But first, let's have it go in. So for normal cookies, we're probably going to put it in for 10 minutes or so. And for the thicker ones, maybe 12. So I just took a little check on them 10 minutes later. They look like that. As you can see, they are a little bit the same size. That'll be due to the sugar. So maybe next time I put less sugar in it. But let's just check one more time. Yeah, they're basically all the same size now. But the other side over there, those look a lot better than those ones. So I'm probably going to keep this design. Okay, 5 minutes later, this is how they turned out. As you can see, just around the edges, they're darker brown. That's what you're looking for. So, as we can see, they all flattened out to about the same size. Obviously, they touched each other, which can just be fixed by, if I made this a bit longer, I could have this one a bit more in the corner, but I probably only could do 6 on a tray, realistically. Maybe 8 if I did middle stuff. These 3 look pretty good though. Now the only thing left is either to write down things you want to change, like maybe chocolate drizzle or chocolate chips, or you want them to be thicker, etc. The way I like to do it is I like to go into my Word documents, write down the recipe, start writing in the tips what I think I might want. Now, this doesn't work because I need to change the sugar. So I might end up changing the sugar or just adding more peanut butter. Not to mention this only made 9 cookies. So I'm probably gonna make this recipe into 2 dozen. So I gotta change this whole recipe to make 24. These are how the cookies turned out. They're a bit harder than I like. I like a chewier, softer peanut butter cookie. So I'm definitely gonna change the recipe to have more peanut butter, more egg, less sugar. I'm also going to definitely keep this design, and I've also changed the recipe, which is in the description below, to have 2 dozen
volume, for quantity, sorry. Sadly, I don't know how to make multiple pages of the previous renditions of the recipe. So the only recipe you'll find in the description below will be the new and improved one. And it will be constantly changing as I change the recipe. So next time I make this, the recipe will change, and so will the recipe down below. If you've liked this video, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I even have my own website. Thank you, and have a nice day.